and communicate with people. But that does not mean that it can be a substitute for real politics at the grassroots level.
Shashi, you've also often said that it's not a substitute for direct political action, and I think both of you are agreeing on that. Why does it occupy a disproportionate media space then? Is it because the media loves stories around personalities, and Twitter is the kind of platform where the story then becomes much more personalized?
I think that's partly it. By the way, it's a great pleasure to be agreeing with Chandan for a change. We used to do it much more often in our student days, but I do agree with his analysis. I'll just add one thing to what Chandan said, which is that while everything he said is absolutely correct, social media does have, thanks to you all in the mainstream media, it has an agenda-setting function that we can't ignore. Yes, only 10 or 12% of our voters, if that, in some constituencies less, maybe in some urban constituencies slightly more, are even reading these tweets. But you folks are picking up the story, and when a Twitter story becomes television news or becomes print media news, then automatically you're reaching a much larger public anyway. So it helps set the agenda for public discussion, which inevitably influences a larger number of voters. Just to add that thought to what Chandan said. But let me say, it is not a substitute for action. It is not a substitute for mass rallies or mass. In fact, it's not even going to be, as it has been in America, for example, a tool for getting people together to a rally, because you won't be able to reach enough people through social media to all get them together in a particular place to listen to. You still have to go out the old-fashioned way, using your party workers, using jeeps with megaphones and all the old traditional techniques. We still aren't up there where in America you can convene a rally on Twitter and people will show up in large numbers. We are not there yet. But I think it's a useful tool, and I think because you folks work with it, you are actually helping set agenda for longer-term public discussion.
But Shashi, can I ask you, if you look at the recent example, let's say, of Imran Khan across the border. Now, he had an online army of supporters, and if the election were to take place in Twitterverse, he would have been the next Prime Minister of Pakistan. There are many analysts in Pakistan who've said that Imran's campaign made the mistake of in a sense, deluding themselves by believing all the chorus of supportive voices that they heard around them. So is there a lesson for Indian politicians in what happened to Imran? I'm not drawing any literal comparisons between India and Pakistan's politics, but just on this limited point of social media.
Yeah, I think the thing is precisely that Imran's experience will demonstrate that social media cannot substitute for old-fashioned political organization. So you use social media and you get this tremendous sort of sounding board where there's so many people who are on the internet who agree with you, and you think, my God, I swept the nation. Yeah. But what actually brings people to the voting booths and that actually delivers seats is still the party organization at the grassroots level, the structures, the bread and butter promises, and certainly in India and perhaps in Pakistan, the large number of voters who, frankly, will never have seen a computer in their lives, who still need to be brought out to vote for you. So certainly we in the Congress Party do believe that the illusory Twitter performance or social media performance of some of our friends on the other side of the fence is not likely to translate, as they imagine, into a political or electoral triumph. They're going to have to organize just as they've always done. We're going to have to organize as we've always done, and we suspect that our message will resonate with more voters, even if they're scoring higher on Twitter.
But Chandan, therefore, does it come down to essentially a point also about class? And I ask this because in our country you have the urban class, which is very opinionated, and therefore it doesn't take that much effort to type out 140 characters or barrage somebody with abuse or criticism or even praise. But to actually go out and vote is a very different ballgame.
Barkha, there are, at the last count, 51 Lok Sabha seats in urban areas. And the Congress, last time, virtually swept the lot. In Delhi, they won all the seats. In Mumbai, they won all the seats. And therefore, there was obviously some communication problem with our party where we failed to win over the urban voter. I think this time we are much better organized and we recognize the importance of the urban vote and winning over young people, first-time voters, in a very significant way. And that is what the effort of the party is. And therefore, you see, whether an individual gains or does not gain, this thing, we don't delude ourselves into believing that Twitter is going to lead us to a magnificent victory. Twitter is a means of communicating, is a means of attracting followers and supporters, but converting them into voters is still an uphill task, and which has to be performed in a traditional conservative style, which our leaders are doing. Now look at Modi. He has such a huge number of followers, but does he neglect grassroots work? He's traveling all the time, he's holding yatras, he's going from village to village, and which is why he's winning election after election, by-election after by-election.
Okay.
So, don't think that Mr. Narendra Modi or anyone is kind of, like Imran Khan, to believe that Twitter is going to lead to a gigantic kind of wave being generated.
Fair enough. Shashi Tharoor, last word to you. Is it changing the nature of politics, and has it changed something within the Congress in terms of understanding the importance of communication? Because one of the criticisms of the Congress leadership has been that they have not taken communication, that your party has not taken communication skills seriously enough. It's been considered a kind of airy-fairy idea which doesn't really belong to real politics.
Okay, you asked two questions there. On the Congress side, yes, we are taking it more seriously, and I think there's a young and dynamic team in charge of Congress communications, both on social media and on traditional media. We have a much larger panel of people speaking for the party. I am indeed one of them, and as far as we're concerned, we believe we have a message to give the nation that we'll give in all sorts of media, including social media. On your larger question about whether Twitter is changing politics, yes, in many ways. First of all, it is an additional means of communication. Second, it is an interactive means of communication. Social media offers interactivity that no other medium does. Third, it is increasing the perception of accessibility and accountability of politicians. If you can write to a minister directly and challenge him or bring something to his attention that you in the past would never have got past the phalanx of flunkies around him to reach him with, then you already have changed the nature of our democratic politics in our country. So all of these changes, in my view, are already happening. They're happening only for the benefit of the 10 or 12% of people who are on the internet regularly, but that number will change. And as you know, we have 950 million mobile phones in our country. The day we get into 4G and much easier and cheaper access to the internet on the mobile phones, we will find more and more people empowered to use social media, and that will change dramatically the nature of our politics. We're at the beginning of a process. It's going to be coming, Barka.
It's nice to end a debate on the buck stops here on a note of agreement. And also what is clear is that social media has raised not just for politicians, but for journalists of the mainstream media as well. We live in interesting times. Shashi Tharoor, Chandan Mitra, thanks for joining us on the buck stops.
Thanks, man.
The Buck Stops Here is presented by Amity University, a leading research and innovation-driven